All right, Eagles, today's presentation is going to be on campaigns and elections. Let's do this. While we go through campaigns and elections, we're going to focus on how you elect a president. So what I want you guys to be able to do is tell me the difference between a primary and general election. So to be elected president, you first need to win the primary election and become the political party's nominee. After you win the primary election, to become president, you got to win the general election. All right, so to become president, first win the primary election, become the nominee. Then win the general election, and you will become the person who actually holds office. So when we talk about the differences between a primary election and a general election, a primary election is an election held to choose candidates who will run for office, compared with a general election, which is an election held to choose which candidates will hold office. Okay, so in other words, the political parties will hold a pre-election to determine who they want to support in the real election, right? So the primary election, yes, it's a election, but if you win the primary election, you don't necessarily win the office, right? Because you will then have to go up against people in the general election or the actual real election. So you have a primary election first. Now, why? Why do we have these primary elections? What's the purpose? Why not just skip over this and just go right to the general election, right? Well, it's because political parties don't want to split their support or their votes. Okay, so let's use an example in history. Let's do the Woodrow Wilson, what's Taft's first name? William Taft, and then Teddy Roosevelt, right? This is the election of 1912. So what you have in the election of 1912 is you have Teddy Roosevelt, the former president, William Taft, the current president, both running, but they're both Republicans. Now, Teddy Roosevelt will run under a third-party deal, but he's really, he's still a Republican. So a Republican voter is now stuck in this situation where, who do I vote for? Do I vote for the Republican, sitting president, President Taft, or do I vote for the, very popular Teddy Roosevelt, who's also a Republican? So Republican voters now have to decide, where do I go with this? They end up splitting their vote in half. And then you got Woodrow Wilson just chilling in the background going, wow, these idiots are really going to do this? I'm going to walk away with this presidency. So yes, Roosevelt and Taft, as you can see together, they combined for 50% of the total popular vote in the election of 1912, right? But Woodrow Wilson down here, he scores a 42% of the popular vote. However, these two candidates will split the 50, and Woodrow Wilson will run away with the election of 1912. As you can see, that map is covered in blue. So yes, Woodrow Wilson won with 435 electoral votes because Roosevelt and Taft split the Republican vote. So when you have a primary election, you're going to unify voters behind one candidate. If you win the nomination, the nominee, you become the party's nominee by winning the primary election. Now that political party can pledge all of their money, all of their support, all of their grassroots movements, all of their efforts behind one person to win that, to win the general election, right? So primary elections are important for picking the right candidate, but wow, they can be contentious because you'll have Democrats fighting Democrats for the nomination, and you'll have Republicans fighting Republicans. As you can see, Barack and Hillary right there, they do not look happy with each other during the Democrat primary back in the day. So again, I want you to be able to differentiate between primary and general elections. One difference is who votes in primary elections. Party members are going to vote in primary elections. In the general election, everybody votes, right? But in primary elections, the political party members are going to cast their vote. Now, Democrats will vote for their candidate and Republicans will vote for theirs. So why is this such a big, why is there such a difference in the primary election versus the general election? The difference is that, it's different because candidates will have a different campaign strategy for the primary election compared to the general election. During the primary election, the campaign will be geared toward winning votes from party members. Messaging will be focused on one side of the ideological line. So if I'm a Democrat and I want to run for the Democrat nomination for presidency, I know that I have to get support from Democrat voters, people who are normally on the left side of the ideological line that will be more in tune with liberal policy or a liberal policy agenda. So my campaign is probably going to be a little bit more to the left side of the ideological line in this example, right? Because I have to win the support of party members. And during this process of winning support for primary voters in these, or voters on one side of the ideological line, it can get pretty contentious, right? So during the primary campaign, you're really going to get after your opponents. But as soon as the primary is over, then everybody's buddies again. And you got to, unite behind one person, right? So you will see politicians very often during the primary be really aggressive toward each other. And then after the fact, they will become allies again against the common enemy, the other political party. Now, once the primary is over and the party has their nominee, during the general election, candidates are going to have to shift gears, right? They need to get independent voters. Independent voters are going to fall more in the middle of the ideological line, and they're going to kind of be, center right or center left. So as if I was the Democrat nominee, I now have to go get some independent voters or even try to steal over some Republican voters. And as a result, my message will have to shift a little bit. So the campaign strategy during the primary election will be different than during the general election. Now, I just want to make a note when we talk about voters who vote in primary elections. These are people who are most of the time party members, right? They're actually a registered Republican or registered Democrat. Now, these types of folks are more politically active and they're more in tune with party efforts. And they're usually more informed about government and politics in general. They have what's known as a higher political efficacy, or they are more in tune or motivated to make a difference in politics. Also, each state will conduct their own primary election. So during the presidential election, each individual state will be in charge of running their own individual primary, and each state will do it a little different than the other. So remember, elections are unique to states. Okay, now, are there any other differences between primary and general elections that you need to know? Yep, sure do. The primary election will consist of open and closed primaries, as well as party caucuses. So there's types of elections during the primary season that you need to be familiar with. All right, so what are these differences? First, open primary. An open primary is a primary election in which all voters may choose which party to vote as they enter the polling place. Republicans, Democrats, and independents can all vote. So all voters can participate in an open primary. In a closed primary, this is a primary election in which voting is limited to registered party members. Only registered party members can vote in closed primaries. Now, why would some states have open primaries, whereas other states have closed primaries? Well, again, we won't go through each state and they'll all have their reasons, but perhaps they don't want the other party to come in and sabotage their election. So they're going to close it down to only registered party members, right? Or let's say a state is like Ohio. Ohio is a competitive state. It's a swing state. Maybe they want to have an open primary so they can get all kinds of voters in there, independents and party affiliates alike. So you're going to have open primaries in some states, and then you're going to have closed primaries in others. But there's another thing out there, a caucus. Okay, a caucus voting is still there. Caucus voting is a local meeting, and that's kind of the key term to identify it's a caucus, is where party members will actually physically meet, a local meeting in which party members select a party's nominee for the general election. Dude, I've totally heard of caucuses, but wait, states still have caucuses? Yes, they do. However, more states have moved toward direct primaries. Okay, what is a direct primary? This is where voters show up to the polls, cast their vote, and then peace out. They're out of there. And then they count up all the votes, and the candidate with the most votes wins. Yes, direct primaries to a lot of people sound a lot easier than the caucus system. I would describe the caucus system as old school, right? We learn about this in American history, the smoke-filled rooms of the caucuses. But yes, they are still out there. Caucuses are used, but more and more states are moving to direct primaries. Now, has the increase in use of direct primaries impacted the nomination process? Of course it has. Yep, it has. In a caucus situation, the party has more leverage on or control over the nomination process. So if you show up and nobody knows your affiliation or where you want to vote, which candidate you want to support, there's not a lot of pressure, right? It's people don't know the way you're going to vote. You cast your vote, you leave. There's no pressure involved with that. However, if you're in a meeting with a lot of other people, yeah, you can be pressured into doing something. You can be convinced. You can be lobbied. So in the caucus situation, the party brass, the people in charge, are going to have a lot more control over who their nominee is going to be. Now, in a direct primary, the ability to lobby is less of an issue, and as a result, candidates have more power than they used to. So I want you guys to be able to make that connection or close that loop. If you're describing why direct primaries have led to a difference in the nomination process, you're going to say that direct primaries take away the ability to lobby, and as a result, candidates have more power than they used to, right? No longer do candidates rely completely on the party, but rather they can use modern tools such as the internet and social media to spread their message directly to voters. Eagles, this is known as a candidate-centered campaign. Yes, the party is still critical, but in today's political world, the nomination process has the candidate front and center. They can use the tools like Twitter and social media to spread their message, and the political parties still have power, but not nearly as much as they used to. All right, so now that we've kind of described the process of a primary election, right? What do they got to do to win? So in order to win the primary and become the nominee for a party, I got to get voters to like me, right? Well, what do I got to do? How do I get voters to like me? You got to have a freaking awesome campaign, right? And that's the key word. You have to have an awesome campaign. How do I have a freaking awesome campaign? What are you telling me here? In order to have an awesome campaign, here's what you got to do. Ready? You got to have lots of money so you can purchase advertising on TV. You got to have a lot of money so you can buy lots of bumper stickers, t-shirts, and hats. You got to have a lot of money so you can destroy your opponent with attack ads. You got to have a lot of money so you can buy the newest iPhone and send lots of tweets. You got to have a lot of money so you can have lots of big rallies. And in a nutshell, you got to have a lot of money. So Eagles, here's the key. Fundraising. Fundraising is a key component to having a successful campaign. So when we talk about political parties, we will talk about how important they are in the fundraising efforts. When candidates run for office, especially the office of the president, the candidate that has the bigger bank account right? They're going to be able to do a lot more things, have TV commercials, have bumper stickers, have rallies. So the money is the key. Now, hold on a minute. This does not sound right. We're always talking about government by the people, right? And consent of the governed and blah, blah, blah. Why is all this money talk getting involved in our election? It just doesn't sound right. It sounds like money has a lot of influence on who gets elected. Really? Yep, it sure does. This is just the reality of it. Money in campaigns has a tremendous amount of influence, and it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like it's ruled by the people, right? Consent of the governed. It sounds more like elite democracy, right? Where those who have access to resources have a better chance of winning the nomination and thus winning the office. Eagles, yes, this is true. This could be argued as a form of elite democracy in the United States, where candidates who have access to resources have a better opportunity to win an office and then control public policy. Now, it feels a lot like the voice of the people is being drowned out by large donors and interest groups buying an election. This can't be. Hasn't Congress tried to pass a law to stop all these shenanigans? Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Here we go, baby. The Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. That is kind of a mouthful. It is abbreviated to the BCRA. So yes, when we say money has this influence on our elections, we don't like that. Congress is aware of that. They were aware of that, and they did pass a law called the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. What is it? The Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act was passed to limit soft money donations. Okay, so yes, the Senate, John McCain, and I think it's called the McCain-Feingold Act also, they wanted to limit soft money donations. Okay, so you got to know what soft money is. Soft money is money that's not given directly to the candidate. These funds do not have contribution limits as long as they are tied to a specific candidate. All right, so to understand soft money, you need to understand the opposite, right? Hard money. So hard money is regulated money. Okay, it's regulated money. Soft money is not regulated money. When you donate money to a candidate, that money has to be disclosed, and there's contribution limits to how much money. Well, let's say you don't work directly with the candidate or the party. Let's say you're a corporation or an interest group, right? Let's say you're a far-right conservative interest group that wants a far-right candidate elected to office. Well, you can elect to run attack ads or different kind of advertising in favor of that candidate, right? That would be an example of using soft money, right? Or you could directly give money to the candidate. That would be an example of hard money. Now, the McCain-Feingold Act, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act was put in place to limit the soft money donations. So yes, Congress did pass a law to try to put a limit to money having a lot of influence in our elections. Now, in addition to all the money, the limits on soft money, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act was passed to limit electioneering communications, right? What the heck is electioneering communications? Yes, that is a mouthful also. Basically, electioneering communications is negative campaign commercials, or even more simplified, attack ads. Now, who's going to enforce this law, right? Well, this is the job of the Federal Election Commission, the FEC. You do need to know about the FEC. The College Board has identified several departments in the bureaucracy that could show up on the AP test. The FEC, or the Federal Election Commission, is one of those agencies in the bureaucracy that could show up. Their job is to regulate campaign laws and keep track of campaign finance. So yes, it was the FEC's job to enforce the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. Now, as you can see right there, I got a Mitt Romney deal. Romney's not the solution, he's the problem, followed with an Obama can't run on that record. These are examples of attack ads, right? So as you can see, we're going to be talking about the Citizens United versus FEC case. So if a law was passed, right, if the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act was passed, why do I see soft money and attack ads till the cows come home? Well, it was because the Supreme Court determined the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act violated the Constitution. Yes, the Supreme Court invoked their authority of judicial review and ruled the BCRA to be unconstitutional. They struck it down. In Citizens United, FEC, and this was 2010, so very recent, right? So, considering all the other cases we have to learn, this one's brand new. The court ruled that the BCRA was unconstitutional, striking down not only the electioneering clause, but also the limits that were placed on soft money. Dude, why? Why was the BCRA considered unconstitutional? It is your First Amendment, Eagles, because political spending is a form of free speech under the First Amendment. Okay, so yes, Congress had a good idea, but the Supreme Court says, you know what, the Constitution's the supreme law of the land, and you should have your freedom, your free speech to campaign this way. Political spending is a form of free speech. So Citizens United overruled or took out the BCRA. Now, the decision in Citizens United versus FEC to overturn or to strike down the BCRA as unconstitutional, that was decided 5-4 on the Supreme Court. So yes, it is a case that is very divisive. A lot of people dislike this decision. There are also people who love the decision and think that it's the right thing. Nonetheless, this is one of those arguments in this class that you may want to pick a side on. Does the decision in Citizens United have a negative impact on fair elections, right? And the authors of these two political cartoons would be making the point that money is going to act as the wrecking ball for fair elections. And in this other political cartoon, money from special interest groups, right? It's causing just a wave of unfairness in the election. So these political cartoons would make the point that the Citizens United decision is kind of upsetting the idea of having fair elections, because we don't want elections where it's, best candidate money can buy, right? We want the people to make the decision. Nonetheless, Citizens United did overturn the BCRA. Well, that was easy. Becoming a candidate for presidency, that's not all that hard. All I got to do is win a primary election, right? All I have to do to become president is convince, party members of my political party to vote for me and not the other guy, right? I just got to get a few interest groups and, large corporations to run some attack ads against my opponent. So it's all good. Becoming president is a cinch, right? After Citizens United, I can get a lot of large corporations to get me to office, right? Cool. I've won the nomination. What do I do next? Congrats for winning the nomination, but the party has only begun. In fact, the real battle is right upon us. You've got to win the Electoral College. All right, now, this is kind of part 2 of our presentation today. The Electoral College is not understood as well as it should be in the United States. We should definitely understand the system in which we elect our president, and that's why I have this political cartoon of a maze. The Electoral College can be considered confusing. Hopefully, after today's presentation, you will be less confused on the Electoral College and how we elect our president. Before I move on, I just want to point out that the Electoral College, again, was one of the compromises during the Constitutional Convention. The framers had concerns, and they just didn't want to go with the popular vote. They didn't want to go with a direct election or participatory democracy. They were worried that citizens were uninformed about their candidates and they wouldn't make the best decision. So This was the compromise, the Electoral College. It's in the Constitution, and this is how we elect our president. So here we go. All right, let's try to break this down simply. The Electoral College is not a school. It is the method in which we elect our president. How does it work? All right, there are 538 total electoral votes. All right, so when you run for president, you look out at the number 538. That is the total number of votes that you can get. In order to win, you have to get a majority, or you have to get 270. So on election night, you're not necessarily paying too much attention to the popular vote count, but rather you're paying attention to how many electoral votes, because the first person to get to 270 has a majority of the Electoral College votes, and they win. Now, how does a candidate win electoral votes? Each state is given a certain number of electoral votes, right? A state's number of electoral votes is equal to their number of members of Congress. So for example, if a state has had 8 seats in the House of Representatives and 2 senators, they would have a total of 10 electoral votes, right? So 2 senators for every state, regardless of population. And then population, as we've already learned with the Great Compromise, this particular example state, they have a population that gives them 8 members of the House. So you add your 2 senators along with your 8 members of the House, and voila, you have 10 electoral votes. Now, here's a map of the United States, the Electoral College from 2016. And you'll see that each state has a number underneath it. The state of Utah in 16 has 6 electoral votes. California has 55. So yes, California is our biggest state with the most electoral votes. But I do want to point out that Montana has 3, Wyoming has 3, North and South Dakota have 3. Do they all have the same population? No. In fact, those 4 states, if you combine their population of the state, it's barely a drop in the bucket to California. So technically, those states have such small populations that somebody could make the argument they shouldn't even get 3 electoral votes. But as we described in the last slide, every state has 2 senators, and every state has at least 1 member of the House. So the least amount of votes a state could have in the Electoral College is 3. So even if you're a puny state like Wyoming, who has hardly anybody who lived there, you still get 3 electoral votes. Now, the next part of the Electoral College is the winner-take-all feature of the Electoral College. And this is where things get a little confusing. Stay with me. On election day, right, each state will vote for their choice for president. The state then counts up the votes for their state, and whoever gets the most votes get all of the electoral votes, right? So each state will have their certain number of electoral votes assigned to their state. On election night, everybody who's eligible or who wants to go vote will vote. The state counts it up. They declare the candidate that gets the most votes, right? They will get all of the electors. So states do not divide up their electors proportionally, right? They do not do this where if it's 50-50, they split the votes, or 51-49, they split the votes. Instead, they have a system where whichever candidate gets the most votes, they get all of the electoral votes. So let's do an example here. If a state has 6 electoral votes, and candidate A gets 200,000 votes, candidate B gets 100,000 votes, candidate A gets all 6 electoral votes, candidate B gets jack, right? And some states are tight. There are states that are decided by a very slim, margin of victory. There are people who make the argument that, well, if it's 49, if it's 49% to 51%, you should split those votes in half. That's not how it works. It doesn't matter if you win by 1 vote or 1,000,000 votes. Whoever gets the most votes gets all of the electoral votes. So unless you win the most, you don't get jack. It is a winner-take-all system. Wait, you mean to tell me that unless a candidate gets the most votes, they don't get any? Yep. This is why a candidate can win the popular vote but lose the electoral college. Margin of victory in a state doesn't matter. Hillary Clinton had more total popular votes in 2016. However, she lost the electoral college. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 2016 map. Now, Hillary Clinton will end up winning the popular vote count, but you'll notice that it's 232 to 306. I mean, that doesn't even look like a close contest. It was close, yeah, I mean, the popular vote was tight, and Secretary Clinton did win, but Trump won, the electoral college pretty easily. Let me bring your attention to California and to New York. These two states really broke for Secretary Clinton. They voted for her in very large numbers, and the margin of victory in California and New York are, two very highly populated states, California being the most highly populated state, right? Secretary Clinton did not get any bonus electoral votes for the margin of victory. President Trump, he won Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, and Florida, but the margin of victory was not as big. They were small. His margin of victory was small. But when Secretary Clinton won a state, she won it by a lot. So what happens is yes, Donald Trump takes the electoral college quite easily, even though Secretary Clinton won the popular vote. And this is obviously one of those topics in AP Government and Politics that they want you to formulate an opinion on. I won't tell you guys my opinion. That's not my job. My job is to tell you what it is, and then I want you to formulate your opinion. There are people who are really upset by this situation. They feel it's a threat to consent of the governed and popular sovereignty. But then there are others who feel that this is absolutely the right way to go. Eagles, I want you guys to formulate your own opinion on the Electoral College. Now, let's look at the same situation, but notice on top, in 2000, this happened again. So in a very short time period, you've had a situation where a president was elected, in this case George Bush, who won the Electoral College, very tight margin of victory, right? But lost the popular vote. So 2000 and 2016 is a situation where the president won the presidency, the Electoral College, but didn't win the popular vote. So if I'm posing this question, why is this, why the Electoral College? I want you guys to be able to formulate an opinion, but it's important to look at both sides of the argument, right? Whenever you create an argument, your argument will be stronger if you can look at the other side's point of view. It's on the argumentative essay for the AP test, you score a point for the rebuttal point, or recognizing the opposing viewpoint. Okay, so the question is posed, why do we have the Electoral College? Why not the popular vote? Okay, so we're talking about why the Electoral College. And right away, we have to think of the Great Compromise, right? Remember that original debate about large states and small states? In modern times, the argument in favor of the Electoral College is similar to the argument regarding the importance of states. When I hear people talk about why the Electoral College is good, I feel like I'm listening to the same argument that was, in favor of or what ended up being the Great Compromise back in the day. So they're similar types of arguments. In the end, the Electoral College is a reflection of federalism. And that's the main argument point if you are in favor of the Electoral College. Wyoming has a tiny population compared to California. If the Electoral College was based on popular vote, Wyoming would be ignored, right? So in this system of federalism where states have a say, states have a platform, the Electoral College makes sense because the state of Wyoming, being small in population, still gets a say in the Electoral College. Now, Wyoming gets 3 electoral votes, 2 senators and 1 member of the House. Now, that's not a lot. It's not a lot. But proportionally, with how small their population is, they are actually overrepresented in Colorado. California still has the most electoral votes, but proportionally to their overall population, they are underrepresented in the Electoral College. And everybody's like, well, are you kidding me? They have 55 electoral votes. Yes, but they have far and away the biggest population. You add up all of those tiny states, it doesn't even touch California. So if it was popular vote, California would far and away have the influence. In your Montanas and the Dakotas and Wyoming and Idaho, they would essentially be nothing. Now, people say, I'm not sure about this. It seems like the Electoral College may not be the best reflection of popular sovereignty. And yes, the Electoral College has and will continue to be a topic of debate within the United States. But if you are making the argument in favor of the Electoral College, you certainly will reference federalism. Those in favor of the Electoral College will reference the importance of federalism and state sovereignty. Without the Electoral College, the so-called flyover states would be ignored during the presidential campaigns. California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Pennsylvania would have an overwhelming amount of influence. Okay, so this political cartoon kind of shows that dynamic of the flyover states, right? If you just look at population, California is going to be the biggest part of the map, along with Texas, Florida, and New York. So if you're a candidate running for president, you're just going to focus on these 4 states. And all of these flyover states that have smaller populations, you add them all up together, it doesn't even come close. So candidates will essentially ignore those. So if you are in favor of the Electoral College, you would reference that these flyover states and the citizens that live in these states, they should have a say. They should not be ignored. Now, obviously, the other side is there are those that are like, come on, really? This is supposed to be government by the people. You're going to tell me that the Electoral College is the way to go? So yes, let's look at the other side of the argument. Those who are against the Electoral College, they are going to make the claim that popular sovereignty and consent of the governed is ignored, and rather we should have a direct vote on the president or participatory democracy. That would be the voice of the people, right? They point out that the Electoral College violates democratic principles because smaller states are disproportionately advantaged. Why? Because the 2 additional electoral votes granted to each state for its senators. And that's the key. So if you're writing an argumentative essay against the Electoral College, you would say that smaller states are disproportionately advantaged. Why? Because of the 2 senators or 2 votes because of the 2 senators. In addition, individuals in small population states have a greater impact on the Electoral College than individuals in large population states. Let's see if I can explain this a little bit better. I think this graph does a good job of showing what I'm talking about, how a smaller state is overrepresented. This is the number of residents per electoral vote. So if you live in California, 1 electoral vote represents over about 650,000 people, right? Whereas if you live in Wyoming, 1 electoral vote is representative of 150,000 people. So the people in Wyoming are way overrepresented. The people in California, even though they have 55 electoral votes, their vote is still somewhat watered down. Now, if you're against the Electoral College, you may ask the question, Could you ever see a change in the Electoral College? And anything is possible, but it's unlikely. Remember, class, amending the Constitution requires 3/4 of the states for ratification. Not enough small states would agree to give up influence in the Electoral College. If you want to get rid of it, you've got to amend the Constitution. To add an amendment, you need to get 3/4 of the states to ratify it. Montana, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, those states are never going to agree to give up power, so it would be hard to ratify an amendment. However, there's the other argument. Nebraska and Maine proportionally allocate their votes. So they split them up, right? That whole thing is if it's 51 to 49, you should split the votes. Nebraska and Maine actually do that, and states do have the choice to proportionally allocate their votes. So if there is a change, that's where it possibly could happen. All right, let's talk about another dynamic piece of the Electoral College. Wait a minute there, Turbo. You got a winner-take-all system. So how do minor party candidates get any love in the Electoral College? And that is a great question. The answer is they don't. The Electoral College essentially eliminates minor parties because unless a candidate gets the most votes, they don't get any. Thus, the well-oiled machine of the Republicans and Democrats are the only parties that can win the Electoral College. Or in other words, the Electoral College promotes a two-party system. This dude up here, his name's Ross Perot. He got millions of votes when he ran for president in the 90s, but he did not get a single electoral vote. Because remember, unless you get the most, you don't get any. So a Green Party candidate or a Libertarian candidate, they're pretty much toast in the Electoral College. Now, this leads to the idea of what's known as a wasted vote, right? This person here, they're throwing a vote in a garbage can, the Green Party votes. That's kind of a bummer, but what they're saying is why would you vote third party? Because they really don't have a chance of winning. So most people will call a vote for third party a wasted vote. Now, there's no such thing as a wasted vote. All votes are important. But in terms of actually winning, yeah, sometimes a vote for a third party candidate can be considered a wasted vote. And that will force people to pick what they would term the lesser of two evils in some elections. Okay, I think I got it. So now I need to go and start planning my campaign. I got to start by having a huge rally in Utah and spending all my campaign money in Utah because it's such an awesome place and I want to win in Utah, right? Hold on there, princess. Candidates don't spend a whole lot of time in Utah. Why? We're a cool state. Yeah, we may be cool, but we are not a swing state. We are known as a safe red state. So the Republican candidate will not bother campaigning in Utah because they've already won. And the Democratic candidate won't bother campaigning in Utah because they've already lost. A large number of states can be pretty much predetermined before election nights. Those states are either strong Democrat or strong Republican. Those states don't get all that much attention from candidates because they've already won or lost in those states. Instead, candidates will focus on, here it is, Eagles, swing states or competitive states, especially highly populated competitive states. So if you're going to organize a campaign, you need to focus on the states that are up for grabs, that aren't on the far left or right side of the ideological line, the competitive states, and the bigger, highly populated competitive states. That's the key. Okay, so you got a map here, and I'm going to circle Ohio and Florida. They are your two biggest swing states. Notice that President Trump won both of those in 2016, and as a result, he won the Electoral College. Most of these states will stay red or blue, right? You're going to pretty much rely on this area to be blue most of the time, and this area to be blue, and then these areas to be red. So you can predetermine where states are going to go for the most part. Okay, so which states are the highly competitive, populated swing states? Ohio and Florida. After that, Wisconsin, Virginia, and Colorado. Okay, so in order to win the Electoral College, my campaign needs to put more resources into winning the highly competitive swing states like Ohio, Florida, and Virginia. Yep, as you can see, Ohio here may not be the biggest state, but in terms of impact on the Electoral College, they are huge. Same with Florida. California, big state, but it's already predetermined to go to the blue side of the ideological line. You'll notice on this map here that post-convention campaign stops per state. So the convention is where the official nomination happens for the candidate. And then after the convention, you'll see that candidates spend most of their time in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Florida. Whereas some of these other states get, where's Utah? Wow, we're getting a lot of love in the Electoral College, right? The biggest state in the country, one campaign stop, right? The Democrat candidate will show up for, a high five, and then they're out of there. So yes, the swing states get all the love in the Electoral College. Okay, to recap the Electoral College, there are a total of 538 electors to go get. You need to get 270 to win. Each state's number of electoral votes is equal to their number of members of Congress, and it is a winner-take-all system. The Electoral College is a reflection of federalism because states have a say, even small states like Wyoming. This promotes a two-party system. Minor parties don't have much of a chance of competing in the Electoral College. They are viewed as a wasted vote. And when you run your campaign, you've got to focus it on swing states. And there it is, campaigns and elections. Thank you, Brittany. I agree. It was a good presentation.